the father who was telling people he lives in New York City, yet his daughter was able to build a tree house on the computer. And you sat there thinking, do you realize she still wasn't able to build a tree house? Like he was saying, here's this opportunity for her to build a tree house. I never, and she still hasn't built a tree house. Hi, welcome to the podcast. I recently had the opportunity to interview a child activist and author, Susan Linn. She has had a long career, the last 25 years specifically focused on advocating for kids when it comes to corporations. And that has to do with the advertising, social media, screen time that kids are over consuming and that are overly being directed at them. So her two books that I read were Consuming Kids and Who's Raising the Kids. And for me, reading these books was very eye-opening and super heart-wrenching. It made me realize that even though I try my best to protect my kids, there's a whole other layer that I hadn't even fully considered. So, if you're like me, trying to parent with intention, trying to shield your kids from negative influences, these books are definitely worth a read. Just be ready to feel a little shaken. For me, I had to take breaks from reading it. Like it was just so much information, so much good information, so well written. So, today in my podcast, we get to listen to an interview that I did with the author, Susan Linn. Thank you for listening. Hi, I'm Courtney, homeschool graduate, mom to three, and founder of udance.com, an online dance education platform for homeschoolers. The Intentional Learning Curve is a podcast that dives deep into the journey of parenting with a focus on being purposeful in every step. It's about embracing the ups and downs, celebrating the small wins, and learning alongside our kids. Whether you're a homeschooler or not, this podcast offers real conversations, practical advice, and encouragement to help you navigate the ever-evolving landscape of raising and educating children at home. Thank you so much, Susan Linn, for joining us on this podcast. To start out, could you just give us a brief background of who you are, the highlights of what you've accomplished in your professional career?
Sure. And Courtney, it's so great to be talking with you. And my whole career has been devoted to either working with children, for children, on behalf of children. I began life as a ventriloquist. I became a psychologist and then an activist and advocate working to prevent the huge and destructive corporate influences on children and childhood.
Wow, that's
So I
amazing.
founded what was called Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood and is now called Fair Play, which has become the leading advocacy group among those trying to prevent the tech industry from taking over kids' lives, basically.
Wow, what a powerful mission. That's amazing.
I mean, when I was 19, I was doing performances around starting, in Boston and then eventually around the country. I worked with Fred Rogers. I made videotapes about difficult issues. But my work taking on corporations to try to prevent the harm that they were doing actually began in 2000.
And
So
you've,
almost 25 years.
that's amazing. You've written a lot about how childhood has been shaped by corporate interests. What inspired you to focus on the intersection of childhood, consumerism, and technology specifically? Was there a moment that you realized this was the issue that needed more attention than others?
Yes. It actually began in 1998 when public television imported Teletubbies from Britain and was marketing it as educational for babies when they had no evidence. And the idea that public television would do this was just appalling to me. At the time, I was working with a child psychiatrist who had a media center at a children's mental health center in Boston. And so he and I wrote an article for the American Prospect. PBS was marketing the show as educational for babies with no evidence. And also, the show was not just a program, it was selling all sorts of toys and paraphernalia to
Mhm.
kids. That
I
was appalling to me.
Yeah, for that to have been such an obvious thing to you really is amazing because I think there's so many people where it's not obvious. And I have to say, reading your book, Consuming Kids, was so eye-opening for me. And it was hard to read, not because it wasn't so well written and like the facts were so, lots of research to show the facts were backed up, but it just was so sad. And I just had to really, like, I had to take a chapter at a time and just step back and process and think, because I have three children of my own. And I was just kind of reevaluating what am I doing and what am I just believing without checking, is what this corporation is telling me, is it what it's telling my kids even true? Because I think most people do just assume that it is. And I think that's what the problem is. So the fact that you were able to recognize that so quickly is amazing.
I mean, one thing that has always been deeply important to me is creativity. And the I've always cared about being able to see new and different ways of doing things, and to have opportunities for that kind of self expression. And it was clear to me, really, from the beginning, that um, that the values, embedded in a corporate takeover of childhood were antithetical to what I valued. Not just creativity, I mean, including, kindness and altruism. I mean, the values of a commercialized culture are me first, or impulse buying. Um, it's anti-critical thinking,
Right.
because advertisers don't want us to think. In fact, when I was giving a talk in Korea at this point many years ago, the slogan for Coca-Cola that year in Korea was "Stop Thinking,"
Mm.
and that was um, horrifying to
Oh,
me.
very alarming.
Really.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that um, I- I've I've always felt that the well-being of children really needs to come first, and that children, if we think about what's best for children, they need to be surrounded by people who care about them, maybe not care about them as individuals necessarily, but care about childhood, and have that as a guiding principle in their lives.
Yeah.
I mean, really, I also believe that if we, really think about what's best for children, that's really what's best for everybody.
Yeah.
It's best for children, that we have a clean, healthy environment.
Hmm.
But the corporate values that that are promulgated have to do with consumption and teaching kids that consuming is the path to happiness, which is in fact a lie. I mean, that's
Right.
not true. The
Right.
path to happiness really lies in relationships and experiences, not in what we buy. The things we buy can make us happy for a little while, but then it goes away. And if we believe that things are happy, um, what do?
Keep
We're
buying.
not happy with
Right.
what we bought anymore. So we buy another
Yes.
thing, a different thing, a bigger thing, a better thing. And that, consumption is a direct um, cause, not the only cause, but a direct cause of global warming,
Hmm.
which is destroying the environment.
Right. Right.
And so I think that we'd all do better if we let our lives guided by what's best for children.
Yes. And it's so interesting that that's not like the common belief that's being held by people right now. I think most people would say, yes, I agree. What's best for children is what's best for everyone. But when you step back and see in your daily lives what you're doing and the commercialization that you're buying into, literally, it doesn't align with our values, the things that we're doing. And you mentioned critical thinking. That's something that maybe 3 years ago, I've started like hearing about with children is teaching them to think critically and especially reading your book that children don't understand advertisements are there to sell them. They think like it's the reality. And I've talked about that before in my podcast too. Specifically for my listeners, we're homeschoolers, and a lot of us are trying to foster independence on our kids. And part of that is teaching them to question what they're seeing, that critical thinking, whether it's TV or online. That's something that you've mentioned in your book quite a bit. I I'm curious if you have like what's the first step? What's the first way to build critical thinking in children because it's not a one-time conversation. It's a constant. I was just in Washington, D.C. with my um 10-year-old this last week. I just got back late last night, and every chance I got, I was pointing out like, "Oh, see, this is actually an advertisement to get you to buy this." I had like a coffee cup and the sleeve had at the end. So it got to the point where, and I've been doing this with her for years, but she would point out things to me like, "Oh, you see that? That's actually there." Because people, they're making money by having that there because it's an advertisement. And so just little things like that. What would your advice be? Like the first step parents can take to foster critical thinking in children?
I think that the very first step goes back to infancy and um, and and allowing children to generate um, activities and to feel that they have a power to have an impact on the world. And that begins, when, a baby, when babies are born and infants initially, they're sort of flailing kind of, but then they start to make purposeful movements, and that um, and in a good enough environment that triggers some kind of positive response from the adults around them, and that's the beginning of a sense of self and a sense of being able to make a difference in the world, and and that's different from constantly telling kids to react, to do this, do that, smile here, whatever. really giving them a chance to do what they do naturally, which is to explore the world with all of their senses, and to manipulate literally their environment. And so, and part of that experience is being able to find out for yourself. And so you find out for yourself whether something will balance when you're playing, with blocks, um, or you find out, for yourself, maybe with some help, about what puzzle piece fits where. And that, is I think the beginning of having some kind of competent interaction with the world. And what's antithetical to that is the push now by the tech industry to get babies in front of screens, and to, which is a passive experience, especially, for babies. It's not an active sort of exploratory experience, although there are tons of videos for babies claiming to teach creativity, which is, ridiculous, or to teach language, when even though what the research shows is that babies can't learn language from a machine. They have to be in relationship, with a person. So that's kind of a roundabout answer, I think, to your question,
Yeah.
but that really is the beginning of having a sense that the world is there to be interacted with, not just to accept.
Not as passive.
Does
I
that make
think
sense to
no, that
you?
makes perfect sense.
Oh,
Yeah.
great.
I
Okay.
think I'm hearing a few things. One is, and correct me if I'm wrong, essentially, we need to get out of their way a little bit more. Like let the block fall off the tower and they try again. Don't, we see if they just moved it a little bit to the left, but just let them figure that out on their own and be supportive for them. And another thing is, and I think this wasn't in your Consuming Kids book. I believe this was in I believe it's your latest book, Who's Raising the Kids? Your example, and you'll tell this story better than I will, of the father who was telling people he lives in New York City, yet his daughter was able to build a tree house on the computer. And you sat there thinking, do you realize she still wasn't able to build a tree house? Like he was saying, here's this opportunity for her to build a tree house. I never, and she still hasn't built a tree house.
Right. It was about the game, Minecraft.
Yeah. So
And he
interesting.
was talking about how wasn't it great that she had built a tree house. And I just said, she still hasn't built a tree
Right.
house. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's so important for all of us to differentiate between online experiences and experiences in what, techies called in real life, IRL, in real
Right.
life. I mean, there really is a difference. But one thing that I want to say that I think is so important for parents is that we all need to realize that this is a societal problem. It's not just a family problem. And one of the things, that troubles me is when people care about their own kids, but they don't care about other people's kids. So, a lot, comes up in the media about how, you know, the honchos in the tech industry send their kids to Waldorf schools, but they create, materials, then they create apps that are really antithetical to the Waldorf philosophy, which,
Hmm.
certainly has to do with interacting with life without, these devices
Yeah.
that really, encourage and inculcate passivity.
Wow, that's such a good point. And I think that goes back again to what we were talking about earlier, where if you did a poll, probably most people would believe, yes, let's do what's best for children. And that might not be what they're actually doing, the like thought of it versus the actual action of it might be
Mhm.
contradicting each other.
And I think not just what's best for my child,
Yes, but all the
what's
children.
best for, yeah, what's best
Yeah, that's
really for all children.
yes. Wow, that's interesting. And we talked about, apps and Minecraft and those sort of things. You talk a lot about how media affects kids' self-esteem, shapes their values, and that was a terrifying part of the book for me to read personally. What would you say from your years of experience? How are corporations getting through to the kids most today? And how have you seen it change over the last 25 years that you've been in this area?
It's funny because when I started out in this work, it was primarily television. I mean, as I said, Teletubbies, and television is and was an incredibly powerful persuader. But the new technologies are even more persuasive, more alluring. And part of that is because they have so much information about us that they can target um, advertising or what we see on our phones or our tablets or whatever. They can target that to your vulnerabilities, to things you're afraid of, to what you care about. They know what you're going to respond to, and the whole. I mean, the devices in and of themselves, they're incredibly powerful and potentially addictive. But the real problem is the business model. I mean, the business model is basically a war for our attention, and that attention is all that matters. And the longer a an app developer or social media, the longer they can keep you engaged, the more advertising you're going to be able to see. And the more advertising you see, the more money they're going to make because that's how they make their profits is through advertising.
Right. And you've talked a lot about the endless scroll. It's
Right. TikTok.
designed to never be
Yes.
done. You just
Yes.
keep going.
Yeah.
And that I've been off social media for 4 years. My business doesn't even have social media because I just don't believe in adding to the noise. I don't advertise in the traditional methods of pop-ups and the apps and social media. Going back to what you're saying about them just knowing so much more about us through social media, through the apps that they didn't know back in the 90s when people were watching TV, it is terrifying. And I got to a point where I stepped back, after using Facebook, Instagram, I'd post a few times a week and realizing my at the time my daughter was maybe 4, I have not had her consent to share all of these pictures and videos and funny quotes she said and what she's interested in. And I have just like given that to the world and it's still out there, even though I've deleted my account. It's really crazy how much we're willing to give over all this information, not just about our kids and us too, for all of these corporations to swoop in and monetize on.
Right. And when parents share um, information about their children or pictures, they're doing it. I mean, they think that they're sharing it with friends and family,
Right. Which is, of course, why
basically.
they do it. Right.
Right. And the other thing is it's so easy. It's just so easy. Um, and I think Jeff Bezos, who founded Amazon, I mean, he talked about reducing friction. The um, It was funny the first time I heard that phrase. I was at a marketing conference, and I write about this in Who's Raising the Kids. I was at a marketing conference, and for me, reducing friction involves either WD-40 or family therapy. That's how I
Yes.
understand. It took me a while to understand. I mean, what he meant was reducing any barriers that might slow down your buying something online. That's what
Hmm.
he was talking about. And so the fact that it's so easy to post those kinds of things, and so seductive. And then, of course, you get likes and you get responses, and
Right.
those are little, trigger little squirts of dopamine.
Right.
So, you feel good, and it makes you, want to go back. I mean, we're all addicted to our devices. All of us are. I
Yeah.
mean, myself included.
Yeah. Well, this is terrifying. Do you?
Well, I don't mean it to be terrifying,
Right.
but I do mean it to, spur people, not just parents, to really, think about the environment we're creating, and also to think about what they can do about it. Again, not just in your family, but in society in general.
Right.
And that's why I founded Fair Play. I and my colleagues founded Fair Play, was because I really see this as an issue of social justice. It's a social justice issue. And, I urge parents to join organizations that are taking on the biggest corporations in the world, taking on the tech industry on behalf of children.
Yes. And so for anyone who wants to dive deeper into your work, get more involved, what is there a website they can go to find this fair play?
Sure, sure. I mean, the URL for Fair Play is fairplayforkids.org.
Okay.
And I suggest that people take, a look at that and what they're doing. They have a screen time action network that is specifically, to help, help parents and families and schools reduce the amount of time that kids spend with screens. I mean, if people are interested in me and my books, you can find me at susanlinn.net.
And it's SUSANLINN. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. This has been so eye-opening reading your books, researching this. If this has been kind of a heavy topic, it's scary how much influence the corporations have on the kids, how much advertising. Just to kind of leave us off, do you see any promising trends happening right now? Any hope that we can hold on to, either in how parents are pushing back or how children's rights are being protected? Any upward positive trends?
I'm so happy that you're asking me this question, because there have been times when I haven't been able to say an honest yes to that. But yes, absolutely.
Fantastic.
There are amazing things happening around this issue. And one of them is the movement, the phone free schools movement. I know that most of your listeners are homeschoolers,
Yes,
but it's still important for you to care about the public schools in you
definitely.
know in
Yeah.
your in your area, and the fact that school districts, cities, states are going phone free in schools. That's astonishing to me, and that's enormously hopeful. And the other thing is that there are a couple of bills in Congress um, that would significantly limit the ways that corporations target kids.
Oh, wow.
And one is the COSA, it's called, and also COPPA. Those are the COPPA 2, I guess. Those are the two bills. Um, and they passed the Senate with 97 votes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and there are only 100 people,
Yeah.
in the Senate. I think
Yes.
there were, maybe it was 96 votes, but I think there were only 3 no votes. Maybe one abstention, I'm not sure. In my world, that's astounding. I mean, maybe it will pass the House, maybe it won't. I don't know, but the fact that concern about this has become so mainstream that all these senators voted for these 2 bills is just
Amazing.
remarkable. Organizations are popping up all over, the country and the world to help families cut back on their kids' screen time. This is, I mean, there's a lot of really terrible things going on in the world, but this little corner of it, things are really hopeful.
Oh, good. I'm so happy to hear that. That's
Me
amazing.
too.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Susan. It's been an
It's my
honor. I
pleasure.
appreciate it.
Thanks. It's been great
Thank
talking
you.
to you.
Thank you so much.